Yeah, I was assured that the 240 time slot or 250 time slot, they swapped me. This is the prime one where everybody has a lot of energy. So I'm thankful for Mark for setting that up for me. Once again, great. It's great to be here. This event is shown to be quite amazing with the number of attendees and the amount of engagement. Once again, happy to be here. Actually, if you look at this slide, it's kind of interesting. My colleague sent me something. He was on holiday in Poland, and he saw this API, and there was construction in the back, and I thought, okay, that's interesting. I'll try and incorporate that into my presentation. I did a little bit more digging. So API, or API, or if somebody from Poland, Americans can't pronounce anything, is a Polish construction company. The company's mission is to carry out construction investments while maintaining the highest quality within the most optimal time scale and using state-of-the-art technologies. I thought that was interesting and relevant. What I thought didn't necessarily work in banking was the company's activity are guided by ensuring health and safety of its people as well as the respect of the environment. So in any case, I just need to give a little bit of a plug to them as they help me with a bit of my content. As for the presentation, through this together, the presentation's on open source and open banking. I hope I can apologize that I'm using RedHat as a proxy for open source and banking. There's a lot of other contributors in the ecosystem. I know MuleSoft is an open source company, is a sponsor here. Even IBM and Microsoft are also open source contributors. So there's a lot that goes into the ecosystem. In the purpose of reuse, I took some of my old slides, hacked them together, and hopefully we can't just, I don't want to give it too much a Red Hat slant, but unfortunately that made it a little bit easier for me. We might have some questions around API management, and so Nicholas, who is initially going to be speaking, is in the audience, and he'll help me out with that. This is my obligatory slide through November 9th. Now, there's some nuance to this slide, if you can imagine. There's not a nuance at all of what's going on in the debates and the election and whatever is going on, but there's some subtlety here. So one I wanted to point out, we're getting close to the cocktail hour. So after 2 drinks, I found out in the UK that people tend to talk a little bit about politics. It used to be about guns. It used to be about healthcare or a few other things. Now it's firmly on this. I just want to say I'm not voting for Trump. You don't need to ask me that question. So we'll get that one out of the way. I also don't want you to think I'm one of the crazies. So that's out of there too. But also what's hidden in here in the subtlety is this is an absentee ballot that I would only send that if I was living here. So I've been a part of the UK community for the last 5 years, going on 6. So I didn't fly in just for this presentation. I'm around. I'd like to speak with you. I'm part of the overall community. So 2 questions which will help calibrate me to the audience and maybe hopefully kind of shift and guide some things. So one is, who here is interested in hardware? Raise your hand higher, can you see? Who here is interested in operating systems? Okay. Who here is interested in language runtimes and platforms to help support that? Who here is interested in integration? Getting warmer. Who here is interested in APIs? Okay, good. Who's here is interested in making money through some industry, such as banking? Okay. I would never have been able to present here 10 years ago as part of Red Hat. We were formerly in kind of the OS layer much lower in the stack. The thing that was interesting about us was open source, but I don't recall any CEO or CIO going, man, what version of RHEL are we running in our data center deep far away? Things have changed, and that's part of the content of this presentation to say, how open source has evolved, what layers of the stack it's really supporting, and how it's become a platform of innovation, not just at the lower layers of infrastructure, but heading toward into more domain-specific and into industry and into even open banking and APIs. I think I'm supposed to have 2 questions. Yeah, the other question was, what do you think Red Hat does? Does anybody? So we got operating system. Right. Yeah, I hear some mumbling. I would say 6 years ago, the answer would be Linux operating system. Some people who follow us more closely, there would be a little bit around open source. We never had somebody go, it's a diverse company focused on open source to create consumable platforms to help innovate and to sponsor innovation through technology. Never heard that answer, but that's our mission statement. That's what we're focused on doing. And this is actually our mission statement: to be the catalyst in communities of customers, contributors, and partners, creating better technology the open source way. So it isn't just the operating system. The customer pulls have really brought us kind of higher up the stack into those layers that I was discussing as you were raising your hand, and even up into more industry-specific type solutions. And when I say Red Hat, we have a lot of touch points. It requires an ecosystem, and it requires our partners in and around us as well as the customers. So, yeah. The other thing from a business perspective, what does Red Hat do, right? So it's, and this is similar for a lot of other open source customers. You know, it's like, do you sell free software? Kind of. But what we tend to do is we build technologies in the community, we make them consumable for enterprises, we wrap them in services, make it so that, you know, ultimately the end user will get something of value. We sit somewhere in the value stream where if the end user needs a mobile application, an application development team might sit on some of the platforms ultimately that are consuming from infrastructure that might also be delivered through an open source vendor. But behind that, there's a whole bunch of activity in various communities that take place. There's 1 million plus open source projects that ultimately get coalesced into value-producing platforms, frameworks, and other that help to kind of deliver the innovation that's needed in modern development. In particular in this slide, so Red Hat started in 1993 as kind of the, I feel we're kind of the initial and kind of flag bearer for open source. So in 1993, it was a company selling Linux out of boxes. It was a company that walked into Wall Street and unbeknownst to the Microsofts of the world, the integrated hardware manufacturers, as well as the kind of Unix distributors, had no idea that Red Hat was walking in there, probably dressed a little bit funnier, a little bit quirky. And open source was actually kind of brought in through financial services. That was one of the key partners and customers where innovation took place. When you think of open source and you think regulation, you think highly regulated, you don't necessarily think open source is a great fit for that. So one of the early adopters of open source was, in fact, financial services. Another one that was a relatively early adopter was the US government, which is also quite strange. But they've kind of got the pace of innovation and the number of eyes of people looking at different things has allowed for better security measures, better transparency and understanding of what's running within various systems. This is kind of a timeline, once again, exclusive to Red Hat. I think the ones that are interesting, Microsoft. So Microsoft, which was an archenemy of Red Hat for quite some time, is now an open source contributor. They're producing tons of open source, valuable work product out there that can be used by others. This also kind of shows how things have kind of moved up the stack. So within here, you see software as a service, even on the far right. So Red Hat's producing software as a service. Integration layers, containers, which is probably a technical thing, but it allows for kind of portable and runtimes to be distributed across various environments. So this, if it was overlaid a bit with kind of the cost of infrastructure going down, the cost of chips as that's declining, you can see that there's a democratization that's occurring as a result of open source technology that's enabling for innovation to occur. So the ability for a small team, for example, to experiment and say, hey, can I use this open source technology to verify a hypothesis, to start the early days of proving a business case. That's something that has been enabled by more broadly open source. Cloud computing is another one, easy access to infrastructure. In combination with open source has allowed for innovation to take place without huge budgets being planned in advance before having anything to get feedback on to understand and truly add value within the organization. It used to be, this is what we're doing for the next year and a half, this is what we're doing for the next 3 years. We have a big upfront capital cost, and then we're going to see if it works. Open source has changed that. And now when I look at financial services and some of the industry drivers, these are the things that open source has looked to kind of tackle, and these are the kind of things that we are being asked by our strategic customers to help be more involved in. So what kind of solutions can we enable or provide within KYC, AML, or PSD2? How do we help enable application-centric IT? How do we help to change the culture? Because if open source is a way for communities to align and find networks that are disparate, even within disparate companies, can some of that be brought into customers so that they, in fact, can also get the benefit of people working collaboratively across different teams? Disintermediation, And then fintech, which I'll go into a little bit more later. So hidden also behind kind of the veneer of different solutions, these are just a laundry list of different things where open source has been part of the solution within financial services. I think big data is something that's really kind of come out through the open sourcing of some of the bigger data processing companies like the Googles and the Googles and the Facebooks, and them providing technology that can then be consumed by other customers. Banking APIs, integration with core banking platforms, the ability to do customer onboarding. All of these things have been solutions built on various pieces of open source technology. Now, going and taking a look at fintech, I don't know, has everybody seen this slide before? I think it's a pretty popular one. It's quite compelling, though, when you look at it. From a fintech view, there's a lot of different services that are hidden behind the scenes of just the standard portal for online banking. And this is kind of the view of different things that if you were to break apart and be able to provide better services within each of these functions, you might have a company. I don't suspect that, and this is a US view, I believe it's Wells Fargo, there is an expectation that these companies will all kind of live in the future. There'll be competitive marketplaces within each of those. They'll probably rationalize into something, but that's the view that because of potentially even open source and the barrier of entry into proving something and getting something that's minimum viable product, something to value, something that you can do quite quickly and show something that's new and differentiating to a customer base. In particular, when you look at the UK financial technology ecosystem, what's quite interesting is kind of the combination of all sorts of kind of positive forces that really make it a very strong area for development. So if you look at the quality of education within, 100-mile square radius, you have Cambridge, you have Oxford, you have Imperial, you have Central London. You also have, more broadly, the EMEA as a source of talent. You have financial services as an anchor industry. You have close proximity to government. You have a burgeoning kind of ecosystem for finance. So it's not to the extent that Silicon Valley is there, where they have layer upon layer of product managers and re-entrant venture capitalists who are coming into products. But there is an ecosystem of money and finance that is available. And then communities are forming within this space. So there's a lot of strength within fintech, and there's a lot of reasons because all those ingredients are coming together. And there's a lot of potential disruption that is to occur or partnerships that need to occur between banks and fintech. So more broadly, how can open source help to enable traditional banks? There's technology that's available that's really on the, we looked at, I described that consumer-facing applications are important. Being able to provide that consumer-grade type application, the right user experience. And so some of the key technologies that you find in there, APIs, microservices, containers, mobile, and automation to help deliver that. Those are all technologies that are readily consumable, that are testable within open source, and are being used in anger by large banks. Process, agile, rapid prototyping, CI/CD, user experience. I can't say open source is really the facilitator of those things, but it's certainly an enabler. Being able to very quickly attempt to try to do something without licensing costs. Being able to prove something and get the initial customers to see it before you make a larger investment in something. And then finally, culture. Communities have already been a part of open source, embedding those into organization. That's a big asset, in Red Hat in particular, gets from bigger institutions. Like, how do we become more like a community? How do we get the right type of talent? How do we get the right type of people? It seems to work across company boundaries, across people's time and different footprints. From an open source perspective, can we embed some of those within our organization? So in particular, I kind of de-identified this a little bit. I don't know if I needed to, but because it was out in the press. But Red Hat in particular is partnered with a large bank to help with the Innovation Engineering Center. So you can read it up there, but basically really empowering new innovation to take place and allowing kind of the builders, the thinkers, the smart folks in an organization to believe and have a pathway to delivering innovation to a large bank. And in particular, we've helped from a cultural perspective to some extent, but it's really an ambition by, the bank themselves, and we provide a lot of the technology, not all of it. Sometimes it's another open source company. Sometimes it's something that's an initial investment, but we help to kind of allow for that full stack, to allow for things to be incubated within an organization prior to being fully invested in. And in particular, and then what's interesting here is really, open banking and open APIs as a facilitator for bringing new partners in, or being able to add value within the existing bank and finding with I guess like a frictionless way of finding ways for existing talent to participate in the growth of the overall bank. So this, a little bit of architecture. Because once again, we do pieces of the overall story, but what we're doing, and so one of the reasons we're here, so we're working with the Open Bank Project to take some of these ideas that maybe, if within a bank they're doing internal APIs, but they still want to take advantage of our container platforms for high utilization of infrastructure, for better ways to turn up and turn down infrastructure in a cost-efficient way, as well as using some of the higher level platforms such as mobile, such as integration, being able to use Open Bank's APIs as a way to provide domain and industry-specific context to what they're building, so that they can have not just, here's a pile of tools that you could potentially build something from, being able to have an easy onboarding to start actually developing something meaningful on top of APIs. Should they choose to switch it to another API or choose to something else, up to them, but it kind of gives you that full stack and ability to see what you can do if you're given an enablement for all that's needed to innovate. So we're looking to actually do, hackathons with the Open Bank team, where we'll go into, various pockets timed with, probably with events, and be able to do very quickly onboarding of creation of new applications by cutting the lead time for setting up environments, or getting teams to be able to collaborate across a certain set of code that they're looking to deliver. So that's something that we feel as open source is really important to allow for the facilitation of those new communities who now, before they had to deal, where do I get my infrastructure? And then where do I get my operating system? Where do I get my language runtime? Where do I get all these different tools? Take that out of the way and allow them to just develop and create something useful as part of a fail-fast scenario. And that we feel is kind of that one of the final evolutions of using open source, all the way from the hardware and disintermediating that through the operating system to actually creating an innovation platform to allow for new ideas in banks. And so for that, I guess my call to action, join us in these collaborative hackathons, join us with the Open Bank Project. Apparently Jerry Rice said this, I'm sure Nike wrote it for him, but he said, today I will do what others won't, so tomorrow I can accomplish what others can't. Let's just say that Team GB thought about that right before they went into Rio, and had kind of the most, 68 medals, or I forgot what exactly it was. They didn't start that journey 1 week before the Olympics, stretch and start going. It's something that is a journey, it's something that you need to invest in, and it's something that you can start doing within the community.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. We have time for one question. Any? So then how's the work with the Open Bank project that you're initiating at the moment? Is that involving any banks already?
So the initial, so we have found each other, I suppose, within initial banks and are looking to kind of provide that in a more external-facing fashion. There is a bit of technical integration that needs to be done because we want to make sure that the onboarding and enablement for anybody who chooses to participate in a hackathon is as frictionless as possible. So we still have work to do from an integration perspective, but we're looking to target probably the first hackathon, maybe early 2017, it looks like.
Okay, great. Well, that might be some of the people in this room who are working with Open Bank Project on preparing for their hackathons. Okay, thank you, Matthew.